A year ago, she sat in silence while they laughed. Today, she's the one making decisions and signing his severance. The sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Novex Tech's 19th floor conference room, casting geometric patterns across the glossy marble table. Outside, the skyline of downtown Atlanta shimmered beneath the afternoon haze. Inside, however, the air felt cold, clinical. Pristine suits, muted colors, overpriced watches. Every face in the room seemed carved from the same corporate mold, except hers. Naomi Jordan sat near the far end of the table, her back straight, a leather-bound notebook open in front of her, pen poised like a soldier ready for orders. At 26, she was one of the youngest analysts at the company and one of the very few black women in the building. Most people in the room knew her name, but not her voice. Still, she watched everything. In meetings, she'd learned how to time her questions or wait until the execs were sipping water or halfway through a thought. She took notes like a court reporter, catching what others missed. Her co-workers saw her as quiet, maybe even shy. What they didn't see was the fire tucked behind her calm eyes. Today was different. Today, Naomi had something to say. The product development team had been tossing around stale ideas for the last hour. A new app feature here, a redesign there, safe, predictable, marketable, all the same. Then the room fell momentarily quiet, the way it does when no one wants to volunteer. But everyone wants credit if the next big idea lands. That's when Naomi leaned forward and cleared her throat, just enough to cut the silence. I have an idea, she said. Heads turned, some in surprise, some in mild amusement. About Mr. Kessler, the CEO, barely looked up from his phone. He was a man who wore expensive shoes but hadn't walked anywhere on his own in years. A tech veteran who'd built Novex in the early 2000s and coasted on reputation ever since. To him, Naomi was a background character, a checkbox in a diversity hiring report. Nothing more. Go ahead, he said flatly. Naomi took a breath and launched into her pitch. It's a platform and online marketplace that connects underrepresented small business owners with everyday Think of it like equity crowdfunding, but with built-in community tools and mentorship functions. It would lower the barrier for first-time investors while giving visibility and funding. Access to businesses that banks often overlook. A beat of silence followed. Then another. Naomi scanned the room, trying to read their faces. Some stared blankly, others blinked, processing. A couple looked, intrigued. Then came the laugh. It started as a snort from Mr. Kessler, but quickly grew into a full-bodied chuckle that echoed across the room like a dropped glass. That's cute, he said, waving his hand like he was swatting away a mosquito. A charity app. Naomi, that's not scalable. You think real investors want to back someone selling hot sauce out of their garage? The laughter that followed wasn't genuine. It was the kind of awkward, forced chuckling people do when their boss makes a joke and they're afraid not to laugh. Naomi sat still. Her face remained composed, expression unreadable, but her fingers tightened slightly around the pen in her hand. She didn't argue, didn't explain further. She just nodded. Once, someone changed the subject. The meeting moved on. It always did, but something had shifted. Inside her, the embers had caught flame. That afternoon, as the team filed out, she remained behind for a moment. Through the window, she could see the city below bustling, layered, alive with stories far more diverse than the boardroom she'd just left. She took a quiet breath and glanced at her notebook. On the page, beneath bullet points and notes, sat her idea. A sketch of the logo, a few names scribbled down. SeedSpark she'd written at the top. They laughed. She remembered that, but someday, they wouldn't. Naomi rose, smoothed her blazer, and walked out not with shame, but with certainty. No one saw it yet, but one day, they would. The office lights at Novex flickered into night mode, casting a pale bluish hue across rows of empty desks. Most employees had already filtered out, heading to dinner reservations or after-work drinks. But in a quiet corner, behind a monitor, with faint cracks on its lower edge, Naomi Jordan remained seated, her posture hunched slightly, fingers tapping quietly across her keyboard. By day, she still played the role, the quiet, efficient analyst, still early to meetings, still taking notes, still giving her polite, measured nods. But by night, she lived in a different world she was building with her own hands. The idea they'd laughed at hadn't died. It had evolved. In the weeks following that humiliating meeting, Naomi began carving time out of the slivers of her life. She stopped going out on weekends, cancelled her streaming subscriptions, sold a designer bag she got as a graduation gift. She poured it all, every dollar, every spare minute, into SeedSpark. Her makeshift HQ was a rotation of downtown coffee shops and 24-hour diners. She met with developers, most of them freelancers working from the corners of crowded cafes. Her voice was always soft but certain as she laid out her vision, connecting underrepresented small business owners with micro-investors. Not a charity, not a handout, a network, a movement. Some listened, some didn't, some overpromised and ghosted. Others tried to overcharge her. She learned fast how to scan a LinkedIn profile, how to read between the lines of tech lingo, how to say no without apology. Late one evening, under the warm glow of a buzzing diner lamp, she met Miguel, a junior engineer fresh out of college with a gift for clean code and a passion for equity. He believed in the project, believed in her. He agreed to work part-time, cheap but reliable. Together, over decaf coffee and too many slices of pie, they built the first skeleton of SeedSpark. Still, money was a problem. She pitched at every small startup event she could find, local accelerators, grant programs, even an online Shark Tank for minorities that turned out to be more hype than help. Most said the same thing: too risky, too niche, not enough traction. Some smiled kindly, others didn't even bother. Each no was a bruise, but Naomi had stopped counting them. Then, one night in late fall, she got an email. The subject line read simply, "Let's talk, we believe in your spark." It was from a small impact investor based in Oakland. They weren't big players, but they offered her a $30,000 pre-seed check. It wasn't much in the startup world, but to Naomi, it was oxygen. With Miguel's help and a designer she found on Reddit, Naomi launched the SeedSpark beta. Within 3 months, the site was rough but real. A few businesses signed up, some investors too. The community features were buggy. The onboarding process needed work, but it was working, and still, no one at Novex knew. By day, Naomi sat through meetings about outdated CRM systems and tone-deaf marketing campaigns. Mr. Kessler had started showing signs of desperation, pushing innovation sprints that led nowhere, slashing budgets, firing staff to impress the board. Novex was stagnating, clinging to its glory days. Then came the layoffs. They hit like a storm, sudden, unannounced, dozens gone in a week. Naomi's name wasn't on the list, not yet, but she felt the floor under her shift. At night, she stared at her screen, eyes bloodshot, fingers trembling. She was running on 4 hours of sleep. Her apartment was a mess. Laundry piled in corners, empty takeout boxes lined the windowsill. But SeedSpark was growing, slowly, quietly. Each new user was a spark. A retired black veteran launching a barbecue brand, a young woman in Detroit selling handmade earrings, a teen in New Orleans crowdfunding his sneaker customization hustle. Each one reminded Naomi, this wasn't just a business, it was a lifeline. One cold Thursday morning, after yet another meeting where Mr. Kessler rambled about reclaiming market dominance, Naomi stood in front of the HR desk holding a white envelope. "Are you resigning?" the assistant asked, blinking. Naomi nodded, handing over the letter with a calm, practiced smile. She packed her desk quietly. No grand announcement. No going-away party. A few co-workers waved half-heartedly as she walked out with her box. Most didn't even look up. Mr. Kessler didn't say a word. He didn't notice. But Naomi didn't need him to. Out in the parking lot, she placed the box in her trunk, sat behind the wheel, and finally exhaled. It wasn't relief she felt, it was resolve. This was no longer a side project. This was war. And she had just taken her first step into the battlefield on her own terms. 1 year, that's all it took. 1 year, since Naomi Jordan quietly walked out of Novex with a cardboard box in her arms and 1,000 ideas in her head. 12 months of sleepless nights, crash course leadership, clunky code, growing pain, vision. Now, SeedSpark was no longer just a platform, it was a movement. Her name didn't appear on the homepage, not yet, but the ripples she'd made were unmistakable. In Black founder forums and entrepreneurial Discord servers, SeedSpark was a whispered solution, a rising hope. The platform had grown from 20 users to 10,000 in less than 6 months. It was picking up steam where others had failed because it actually listened. Tech newsletters started picking it up. Not the glossy, mainstream ones at first, but the trusted, gritty publications, the kind that made founders pay attention. Headlines read, "SeedSpark is quietly revolutionizing access to capital for Black-owned startups. Built for us, by us. How SeedSpark is reshaping startup culture." Naomi read the articles with quiet disbelief. Then she'd fold her laptop shut, press her palms against her desk, and remind herself, this is just the beginning. But the whispers didn't stay small for long. By fall, investors from mid-tier and even top-tier firms began reaching out. Their language changed, less condescending, more curious. They'd seen the traction, the retention numbers, the engagement metrics. They were finally seeing what Naomi had seen all along. She didn't rush. She took meetings, yes, but on her terms. No more begging rooms of men who saw her as a checklist. No more proving her worth. She spoke plainly, moved decisively, and more than once walked away when the money didn't align with the mission. Naomi had changed to gone was the tired analyst with whispered ideas and second-hand heels. Now she walked into rooms with her shoulders back, natural curls shaped in soft waves, and a rotation of sharp blazers in deep earth tones. No apologies, no twitching, just power measured, graceful, undeniable. Then came the NYC demo day. The air inside the industrial-style venue was thick with anticipation and espresso. Concrete floors, glass walls, exposed beams. It was the kind of space designed to look like innovation itself. Naomi entered with her team, Miguel to her right, and a new head of operations, Tiana, trailing behind with pitch decks in hand. They weren't the flashiest startup in the room, but they were the most talked about. You could feel it in the way heads turned, the way people leaned toward one another to whisper, "That's her." She registered at the front. As the badge printer whirred, Naomi scanned the list of presenting companies. One name made her pause. Pivot Edge. She blinked. There it was, Mr. Kessler's company, the once bloated tech giant that had fired her colleagues and gutted its product line. It had rebranded, like she'd heard in whispers, with a new mission-driven focus. The irony stung. The logo was different. The tagline now read, "Reimagining funding for the underestimated." Naomi nearly laughed. It was almost a parody of SeedSpark, except this was Kessler's version, polished, performative, corporate too. The bone. She slid her badge onto her blazer and moved forward. Hours later, the demo sessions began. The room was packed, investors sipping cold brew, reporters scribbling in notebooks, founders pacing and adjusting mic packs. Naomi's slot was scheduled after lunch, before hers. Pivot Edge. She watched from the side of the room as Mr. Kessler walked onto the stage. He looked thinner than she remembered, older. The charisma was still there, slick smile, expensive watch, confident tone, but something was missing behind his eyes. He pitched with forced enthusiasm, a platform connecting underrepresented founders to capital, mentorship, and community. Naomi listened carefully. It was hollow, all buzzwords and market data, nothing human. No real founders, no success stories, just projections and branding slides. When the polite applause ended, Naomi stepped backstage. The coordinator handed her the mic. "You're up next, Ms. Jordan." She walked onto the stage with calm authority. No slides, just her, the mic, and the truth. She started with a story. "Last year," she said, "a single mother in Detroit used SeedSpark to raise $2,000 to expand her home bakery. Today, she employs 4 women from her block and just signed a contract with a local grocer." She moved from story to story. Real people, real outcomes, numbers, yes, but anchored in lives, not just market potential. The crowd leaned in. By the time she finished, the room erupted, not with thunderous noise, but with something deeper, respect. Naomi stepped down, heart pounding. Backstage, as she took a bottle of water, she caught sight of Mr. Kessler standing off to the side. Their eyes met for just a second. He didn't recognize her. Not in this version, not in this light, and that was the sweetest part. The growth was no longer a quiet hum. SeedSpark had exploded with every new quarter. Naomi watched the numbers rise, user growth, retention, investor interest. But beyond the metrics, something deeper had taken root. Trust. Founders were telling their communities, mentors were recommending the platform, and investors who once said to niche now begged for a seat at the table. Naomi stood at the center of it all, both conductor and compass. Meetings now happened in polished glass. offices with sweeping city views. Her calendar was carved into 15-minute slices, and yet, she remained the same woman who once pitched in coffee shops and typed code at 3 a.m. in her pajamas. Then came the opportunity. It arrived as a forwarded email, short and clinical. Pivotage, the floundering rebrand of her former employer, was quietly shopping for buyers. Open to strategic acquisition discussions, it read. Naomi stared at the screen, her breath still. Mr. Kessler's empire, once untouchable, was bleeding out. Staff turnover was at an all-time high. Investors were pulling out. Their attempt at social impact tech had failed because you can't fake community. At first, Naomi hesitated, not out of fear but precision. This wasn't personal. Not anymore. Her board gathered 2 days later in SeedSpark's Midtown conference room. Windows flooded with afternoon sun. This isn't about revenge, she said evenly. It's about infrastructure. Pivotage still has assets, talent, IP, regional access. If we acquire them, we leap forward 2 years. No one disagreed. The vote was unanimous. SeedSpark would acquire Pivotage. Naomi didn't want her name on the negotiation papers. Not yet. Her legal team set up a shell entity to keep things clean. The due diligence phase began. Financials were worse than they expected, outdated systems, low morale, a marketing team that hadn't posted in 3 weeks. Mr. Kessler, it turned out, wasn't handling the fall with much grace. Rumors circled. He blamed day pressure for his failures, claimed younger founders didn't understand real tech, and had alienated his own executive team. The contrast between him and Naomi was stark. While he clung to the past, she built the future quietly, steadily, on the shoulders of those he'd ignored. The deal moved quickly, and then came signing day. A sleek boardroom on the 33rd floor of an investment firm in Manhattan had been chosen for the formal closing. The long oak table gleamed under recessed lighting. On one side sat Naomi's legal counsel, her CFO, and the interim transition director. Naomi stood at the head of the table, back turned as she reviewed the contract one last time. Outside, the clouds hung heavy, as if holding their breath. The door clicked open. Footsteps measured, confident, oblivious. Mr. Kessler entered the room in a navy suit and a smug smile, holding a leather portfolio. His hair was more silver now, and his one's posture sagged slightly with age and ego. He walked in expecting another faceless acquisition, another young founder with funding to salvage his sinking ship. He did not expect her. Naomi turned around slowly, her presence calm, commanding, undeniable. Her curls were pulled back today, her blazer bone white against her warm skin. Number jewelry, just sharp eyes and steady hands. Kessler stopped mid-step, his expression faltered. Just for a second, but long enough. He stammered. She tilted her head slightly, offering him the smallest smile. Good to see you again, Mr. Kessler. He looked around the room, suddenly aware of the silence. His grip on his portfolio tightened. His jaw shifted. You're the CEO, he asked. Though it wasn't really a question, Naomi didn't flinch. I am. A long pause stretched across the table. Even the lawyers stayed quiet. Kessler cleared his throat, trying to recover. Well, I suppose, congratulations are in order. Naomi nodded politely. Thank you. She sat down at the head of the table. Slowly, with full intention, she lifted the silver pen that lay before her and signed the final page of the contract. The click of the pen echoed like a bell. It was done. Pivotage was now a division of SeedSpark. Mr. Kessler had just sold his company to the very woman he once mocked for dreaming too big. Naomi stood. There will be a transition plan sent to your team this evening. You'll be asked to step down immediately as part of the executive restructuring. Kessler opened his mouth, but no sound came out. She extended her hand. He hesitated, then took it reluctantly, limply. Take care, she said, her voice soft, not cruel, not triumphant. Just, final. He left without another word. Naomi watched him. Go. Not with bitterness. With clarity. The room exhaled once the door closed. Miguel leaned in and whispered with a grin. Did that just happen? Naomi didn't answer. She simply looked down, at the contract again, then out the window over the city, over the storm clouds rolling in. This wasn't the end of a rivalry. It was the beginning of a legacy. The sun streamed through the tall windows of the East Side Community Innovation Hub, warming the wooden floorboards and catching motes of dust that danced lazily in the air. The room buzzed with quiet anticipation. Dozens of young Black founders, creatives, and students filled the folding chairs, notebooks open, eyes forward. Some had traveled from other cities, others had just come from across the block, but they were all here for the same reason. Naomi Jordan stood at the front of the room, a soft smile curving her lips as she surveyed the audience. Her presence was effortless, no need for pretense or performance, just honesty and clarity. She wore a cream blouse rolled up at the sleeves and high-waisted, slacks that matched the neutral tones of her confidence. Her curls framed her face like a crown. A small mic was clipped to her collar, though her voice already filled the room with calm strength. She paused before speaking, letting the silence settle, not awkward, but reverent. Then she began. "They won't always believe in your vision," she said, her voice steady, measured. "They'll tell you it's too risky, too soft, too small, that it's not scalable, not serious, not the right time." She let the words hang there, then continued, "So believe in it twice as hard." The room leaned in, because sometimes the people with the most power have the least imagination, and they'll try to pass that off as wisdom. Don't buy it. Nods and murmurs of agreement rippled across the crowd. Naomi smiled, but it wasn't the smile of someone who had won a game. It was the smile of someone who had built a world, brick by brick, when no one else saw the blueprint. After the talk, she stayed to answer questions, take photos, and hug the ones who came up misty-eyed. A young woman in a thrifted blazer held Naomi's hand a moment longer than expected and whispered, "I didn't think I belonged in rooms like this until I saw you." Naomi held her gaze. "You always did. They just didn't have a seat ready for you yet." Later that afternoon, Naomi returned to SeedSpark HQ. It stood on the edge of downtown, in a building that used to belong to Novak's, her old employer. The irony was still surreal. The same lobby she used to walk through unnoticed now had SeedSpark's name in brushed brass letters above the reception desk. The interior had changed completely. Where once there had been soulless, grey carpet and frosted glass offices, now there were vibrant murals by local artists, live plants hanging from wood beams, and laughter echoing from open co-working lounges, a podcast room, a founder's kitchen, a childcare room, even real support for real people. It wasn't just a workplace, it was a beacon. Naomi stepped into her office, light-filled, minimalist walls lined with books, artifacts and handwritten notes from founders who'd raised their first rounds through SeedSpark. On a shelf sat her old leather notebook, worn and fragile, still holding the very first sketches of the platform. She walked to the window and looked out at the city. She loved the same view she used to stare at as a junior analyst, wondering how long she'd be ignored. Now she stood here as a CEO, but more importantly, as a catalyst. Below, people were moving, crossing streets, sipping lattes, holding pitch decks and tote bags, and children. Life in motion. And behind her, through the glass door of her office, her team worked with energy and laughter, planning the next release, helping onboard a new batch of founders, fielding inquiries from investors who had once overlooked them. Naomi closed her eyes for a moment. She thought of Mr. Kessler. After the acquisition, he'd slipped into quiet retirement. No statements, no interviews, just a closed door and a fading legacy. Some said he moved to the mountains. Others heard he was writing a book. Naomi didn't care. She didn't think of him with anger. Not anymore. The truth was, she was grateful. His dismissal had sharpened her. His laugh had become the catalyst. Without it, she might have waited longer, played safer. She opened her eyes again. This wasn't revenge, it was justice. With grace, a kind of poetic full circle. But she hadn't done it to prove anything to him. She'd done it for everyone who had ever been told no by someone who couldn't see beyond their own comfort. She'd done it for that version of herself who sat in back corners of conference rooms, hoping someone would take her seriously. Now, she made sure the next generation wouldn't have to wait for permission. Naomi stepped away from the window, back toward her desk, where another proposal waited to be reviewed, this time from a Black-led fintech startup in Baltimore. She smiled. The cycle was continuing, the torch already moving. Legacy wasn't built on applause or articles. It was built on impact. Real people lifted, dreams launched, doors opened that once seemed sealed shut. Naomi Jordan didn't just change the room, she rebuilt the building.